Welcome back, everyone. Today we will just be covering some basic tools: Visual Studio Community, Visual Studio Code, Docker, and MySQL. You can download all of these tools in their respective websites. This is Visual Studio Community. This one is Visual Studio Code. This one is Docker Desktop, MySQL Workbench, and eventually you will need this image, but you don't need to download from here. We'll not be covering Power BI today. We already done that in another video. The Video Studio installer, you will appear something like this. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it again. But you simply press the install on the Visual Studio Community 2022 or higher. It will then show up something like this, where you are going to choose which languages or packages you are going to install. In this case, we only install C++ and C#. In terms of Visual Studio Community, that's it. The other are pretty straightforward. You're not going to have a lot of problems with it. Okay. After you install everything, you are going to have to install the Docker extension, which is this one. In Visual Studio Code, we are going to use this instead of Docker. We're not going to use this interface. We're going to use this one. This one shows the individual containers, the images, and the volumes. So to start, you're going to first create a persistent volume, and it will show up here. This will allow you your data to persist. You can then create an individual container using the persistent volume test that you just created and the MySQL server latest, which corresponds to this one. We set to this port. It is important. It might not work in another port unless you do extra configurations. We also put the flag latest, so this way it will always download and execute the latest MySQL version. The individual container will show up here. If you want to use the Docker, it's the same concept. But again, we will not be using it because we want to check the logs. In order to access it, you're going to need this password right here. So you're going to search for the generated root password to access MySQL. You're going to copy it. And now we need to run it in PowerShell. This is a terminal. If you're not seeing the terminal, you press View, Terminal. Then you run this command. Docker execute MySQL server test, which is the name of the container, and the root plus using the password. Do not use Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V here. Simply click your right mouse click and enter. Okay, otherwise it won't work. We'll first change the password. I'm going to set something more simple for tutorial purposes. So we're going to change the password to mypass. We then create a new user. So now we can go to MySQL Workbench. You also need to run this command, ipconfig. You press enter and it will show up your IPv4. Test the connection. Okay, it was successful. I'm going to put mypass. From Visual Studio, you're going to have to create a MySQL generic context. This is the documentation that you need to follow for the MySQL. In this case, this is a Microsoft XKL and MySQL is this one. So you're going to have to create a context. The documentation is available here, but if you want a simple example, this is MySQL generic context. So it's really just a couple of lines of code. It's nothing too complicated. My Microsoft SQL context is also pretty simple, and how you use it, you just call the connection string and it will create a context, and inside the context you will have your entities that you created. In this case we only have a few of them. In this case, they are always the same. It's just a couple of entities. And in Nugget, you might need a connector, so I advise you to try at least these two for MySQL, but depending on the language or your database, you may need to change, but these two are two starting points. And that's it. In order to cover the basics of these tools, so again, Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, Docker, MySQL Workbench. We then use Visual Studio Code to access Docker and access the logs so you can get the password. You then can use either Workbench to create your database here. We prefer code first, so we create the context, then we write inside that context what we want, and the rules and the relationships, the entities, what columns they have, what are the keys. That's it for today. We'll see you in the next video.